Good evening, and welcome to Heating Spirit Voices, Intuition and Healing in a Council of the Dolls. A joint production of Literary Witnesses and Eye of the Heart Center. I am Hawana Sullivan Jansen, the chair of Literary Witnesses for one more year. And on behalf of the committee and the church, we welcome you here to Plymouth Congregational Church, where we seek to live life at the beautiful intersection of good deeds, faith, and action. Plymouth recognizes the arts as a vital part of our spiritual journey. The church has an art gallery, a theater program, a music series, and for more than 20 years now, a reading series in the form of Literary Witnesses. Our events are free, but they're not free to us. So we invite you as you leave to dig deep into your pockets and offer what you may find to the volunteers with baskets at the exits and at the reception. And new this year, QR codes, which you will find on the backs of the pews and also available in the lobby at the Eye of the Heart table, where you can give electronically using your phones. Oh, and you can also sign up for the Literary Witnesses and Eye of the Heart electronic mailing list at the tables in the lobby and at that location as well. Okay, now here comes the housekeeping. Turn off your cell phones, please, or at least place them into silent mode or airplane mode. I love it when the speakers double check as well. I've had that happen to me when I was on the stage once. Okay, did you get all that? Now on to Elizabeth Jarrett Andrew from our partner for tonight's event, Eye of the Heart Center. Oh, and special thank you and hello to the people who are listening to tonight's event via Zoom. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Hawana. Thank you, Hawana, and a special thanks to Literary Witnesses and Plymouth for hosting this with us. So I am Elizabeth Jarrett Andrew. I'm a member of Plymouth, and I'm the author of Swinging on the Garden Gate, Writing the Sacred Journey, Living Revision, and a number of other books. I'm also one of the founding members of the Eye of the Heart Center, which some of you are probably wondering, what is this Eye of the Heart Center? It's a very new collective. We just started offering programs in January of artists and wisdom teachers who are dedicated to nurturing meaningful community and supporting spiritual transformation through the arts. So I invite you to learn more about us and sign up for the newsletter and meet some of our other founding members at the table in the lobby. And we're really excited that you have come curious about intuition, healing, and heeding the Spirit's movement in the experiences of two writers and friends. Eye of the Heart is committed to offering programs that expand our understanding of spiritual practice and transformation, especially within the creative process. So we're grateful for this opportunity to be in collaboration with Literary Witnesses and Plymouth. And I'm very excited to introduce two friends of mine to you. First of all, Elizabeth Fletcher is a writer and a yoga therapist from St. Paul, and she was raised Catholic but stopped practicing once she left home. In 2005, while she was earning her MFA at Hamlin, she took a travel class to Guatemala, and when she was immersed in that country's Catholic and indigenous spirituality, she experienced what she can only call a heart awakening. She returned home, craving a spiritual practice, and began to meditate daily. And subsequent trips to Guatemala drew her to Maya spirituality and an apprenticeship with Guatemalan daykeepers. Since that time, she's continued to study with shamanic and intuitive healers. She's been teaching yoga since 2017, and she earned her professional yoga therapy certification from Kripalu School. And she's also a writer. Her fiction and nonfiction have appeared in or are forthcoming from New Flash Fiction Review, The Lost Balloon, Leaping Clear, Tiferet, and Awakenings, Stories of Bodies and Consciousness. Elizabeth facilitates an embodied writing practice through Eye of the Heart. In fact, her next practice session is this coming Saturday morning at 9. It's online, and it's an opportunity to bridge movement and writing to awaken the creative juices through a little bit of movement. Mona Susan Power is an enrolled member of the Standing Rock Sioux tribe. She was born and raised in Chicago, and during her childhood, she was a member of the Chicago Indian Village Movement, which was a group organized to protest the conditions of Native peoples that were lured to urban areas with promises of secure jobs and good housing that seldom materialized. In 1979, a documentary following the experiences of that group was nominated for an Academy Award. So Mona is the author of 4 books of fiction, and one on the way. They include The Grass Dancer, which was a Penn Hemingway winner, Roof Walker, which won the Milkweed National Fiction Prize, Sacred Wilderness, which was my personal favorite, and most recently, Council of Dolls, which has been nominated for a National Book Award. She's a graduate of Harvard College, Harvard Law School, and the Iowa Writers Workshop. Her short stories and essays have appeared in many publications and anthologies, including the Best American Short Stories, the Atlantic Monthly, the Paris Review, the Missouri Review, Plowshares, and Granta. And you'll hear more about her spiritual formation as she shares. So both Mona and Elizabeth have rich creative practices in which their own transformational journey through the writing process is as significant as their artistic product. Is that fair to say? I've had the immense privilege of participating in some of these conversations, and I'm really excited to be able to share them with you. At the end of their conversation, we're going to widen the conversation to include you and those who are watching online. So if you have a question, if you don't mind just holding off until these two wind down, and then we'll widen the circle. So thank you for being here, and we're excited to hear what you have to say.
Thank you.
First of all, just thanks to everybody. Thank you for hosting us.
Yes.
And thank you for showing up, whether in real life or virtually. Really glad you're here. So we are talking about a fairly slippery topic, intuition, kind of hard to pin down. I was hoping you would start us out with a passage from your novel on mystery. So page 195.
Page 195. I will get right to that. First, I just wanted to give them a little bit of an idea of my spiritual background, and then I'll get to that. I actually had to make notes because I've gone through so many changes. And I was like, there's this phase, then there was this phase. So I was raised both Catholic on my mother's side, and my father was what she called a WASP. A white Anglo-Saxon Protestant, but he converted to marry her. But I was also raised Dakota, knowing and practicing many of our indigenous spiritual beliefs. So I had those two very different, sometimes conflicting spiritual belief systems that were a part of my life. But then midway through 5th grade, I'd sort of had enough with what I thought was hypocrisy in our very particular church. So I'm not in any way condemning other churches, and so I demanded to leave Catholic school. And my parents let me, we all left. And so then I was just, I guess, believing Dakota way. But then, after being in school all these years in the academy, I became an atheist, but a really angry one. I have many chill atheist friends. They don't believe, some of them wish they did, but they just don't. I should have known I was on a spiritual path because you're only that angry when you're resisting a call, right? So I really let the academy influence me in terms of their, the bias they sometimes have, for the secular, the cerebral, being in control of everything. Okay, I shouldn't say that, that's mean. But when that changed is when I became serious about the art of writing fiction. I broke open again to my authentic heart, my authentic self, and began writing from that space of trust in guidance, ancestors, and inspiration. And in January of 1999, I spent a week in bed with what I called later God's flu, wrestling with my spirit. And I wasn't physically sick, and yet I was sick. And I came out of the other side of that week a person cognizant that I'm on a spiritual path and that I have deep faith in more. And just one caveat before I do as Elizabeth asked, I just want to say that when I talk about my beliefs, that's belief with a capital B. I'm never maintaining that I know anything, and I'm never proselytizing. I think it's wonderful to have a diversity of belief systems and non-belief systems, because for me, atheists remind us to be humble, remind us that none of us knows for certain, and even that statement is just my belief, or just my attitude. So anyway, I just wanted to make sure to say that. So page 195, and actually put little stickers in here to help me find it. Okay. And is it from the bottom from my studies? So this is the voice of Cora, who is a Dakota woman born in the late 1880s, as my grandmother was. My grandmother was born in 1888. And this is from her journal that she's writing at the Carlisle Indian Industrial School in Carlisle, Pennsylvania, which my grandparents both attended on my mother's side. From my studies, I gather Washichus wish to know everything there is to know. That isn't our way. We understand that aspects of the world are so wonderfully mysterious, we aren't capable of comprehending the whole of it. Even our wisest counselors and most gifted medicine people can only graze the deepest mysteries with fingertip thoughts, and they do not press, because to do so is a God's privilege. What is sacred, what is wakan, speaks to us, shares what we need to know, and no more. Are we to be trusted with the power of perfect knowledge? Can our minds expand enough to contain star language? Can the voice of water fill us with the fierce pull of its secrets, and yet we do not drown? Can we bear to hear the full store of Earth's memory? Can we hold our tongues still enough when necessary to avoid singing the world down? I write papers for religious studies that are dead words on a page, a repetition of what my teachers want me to say. I give them these words and not my truth, because I'm not recklessly bold like Jack. I'm an ant moving my grains of sand each day, moving my pencil across paper to record what is drilled into me. I reserve honest thoughts for this private journal, which I've taken to hiding beneath my mattress. There is a danger here in being fully seen and known. The captain thinks that to save Indian people, he must run a factory that produces shades, children who no longer recognize themselves or believe in their existence. So, thank you.
What a great opening. Thank you so much. So, that lays the groundwork for mystery of what we can and what will maybe graze our fingers over and what is so hard to name. But I am wondering, as you talk about your God's flu, did that coincide with you starting to move away from law and into creative writing? Like, is there something that happened simultaneously, or did they happen separately?
No, the God's Flu was in 1999, and by that time I already had a book published.
Okay.
So yeah, when I was in law, which really I think was trying to live my mother's dream, because she was a real activist, and just had a phenomenal memory for details and facts and could summon them. You know, I have a more wandery sort of mind that can't hold on to details so well because I'm always up in the clouds. So I should have known earlier, before graduating, before getting all those student loans, you know, that I wasn't meant for the law. And as a matter of fact, I was a part of this drama society at our law school, and there were a bunch of us who were frustrated arts people. And by my third year, when I graduated, we were doing 5 full productions every year. So somewhere along the way, it was art. It was the drama society, I think, that helped me to realize, oh, these are my people, and this is my world. This is my air. This is where I need to be. But that's all very well to figure it out. Then it's, how do I manifest this, right? I actually had a hard time getting a job after law school because no one believed I could earn a lot of money. They didn't believe I wasn't going to change my mind pretty quickly. So I just got a jobby job, a 9-to-5er, not a career. It didn't make much money, but it gave me the freedom to use every bit of extra time I had, including my lunch hour, to get serious about my creative writing. And after a few years of getting serious about the creative writing, it's like that was slowly breaking me open to who I really am. And then all hell broke loose. So, yeah.
And at what point did you start to see it as spiritual work or touching something deeper, something more than just our unconscious?
That's a really great question. I have to say, and I'm going to talk about my mother a lot. My mother passed away almost a year ago. In just a few days, it will have been a year ago. She lived to be almost 98 years old. And she was the primary influence in my life, so much of it for good, but also having her own really ugly inner script. I think a lot of it coming from the Indian boarding schools that she attended, where these children were being constantly shamed. I inherited that inner script. So a lot of what she offered was good, and then some of it was very challenging. But I think I started to have the fingertips on something spiritual happening when my mother noted she loved my first novel, The Grass Dancer. She approved of it. And I was like, phew, thank God. But there's a character in there, Chuwignakaduta, which means red dress in English. And she is a character who is living in the 1800s. And she's a woman warrior who wears this red dress, which that was very unusual. Our women weren't wearing a dress like that, a buckskin dress painted red. And my mother read that and she said, Chuwignakaduta is one of your ancestors. Just because we don't know about her yet doesn't mean she isn't real. And Mom was always going to the National Archives and doing research. And by God, she came up with, the missionaries came and were working with our people, and my great-great-grandfather, Chief Matonupa, became very good friends with Father de Smet. And anyway, so there were all these Jesuits writing about my family. She came across one letter that they wrote about this ancestor of mine who wore a red dress and who had been a woman warrior. And we'd never heard of her. We'd never heard stories of her until Mom found that after my book was out there in the world. And I did get a chill. I wasn't yet ready to tell her, oh, you're right, Mom. That took me a little bit later. But I started to think something is at work here that is completely outside my control. You know? Yeah.
And so for those who may not be familiar with it, would you talk a little bit about ancestor work?
Sure. You mean when you're, because I feel like I don't consciously do it.
Okay.
I mean, that's part of, I took out some notes from essays that I've written about all of this because I'm such a babblehead, and to try to, organize myself. I don't have something about that point though yet. And I feel though that I am not, I'm an intuitive writer, which, well, okay, actually this does sort of speak to this. Let me read this little piece from an essay called Spirit Talk. I am an intuitive writer, often oblivious to what I'm really saying until years later. So I'm going to skip this part. Unlike my father and most of my school teachers, I believe in magic. I believe the universe speaks to me in ways that others will miss if they haven't learned to pay attention. The universe isn't always noisy and obvious, skywriting what it wants us to know in large cursive loops, like the Wicked Witch's message in The Wizard of Oz. Sometimes the voice is quiet and subtle, seeming to rise from our innermost depths. The universe offers me visions, short films that play in my head without dialogue. An older woman dances in a buckskin dress on the moon. A young woman descends from the sky as if riding an invisible escalator. I am given these mysteries to solve, these characters who arrive like strangers and end up relatives. My first paragraphs of solution, of story, are a leap of faith. I trust the visions that have come from a place that is true, that will ultimately reveal what I need to know when I'm ready to listen. I work with my characters as if I'm their confessor, their therapist. I'm grateful when they begin to reveal their lives and secrets. I cannot say I am their creator because they don't arrive in pieces, even if pieces are all I see in the beginning. They are whole, they are separate, they come from deep places I don't fully understand, and they are my teachers. And so, oh, thank you. I thought it would take less time to read that than me babble my way in circles and get there in a messy, confusing way. But I think that's my way of trying to answer that for me, that is kind of ancestor work, because I do feel that they are very much involved in helping me in bringing forward these stories, these visions, these lines, like from a voice suddenly in my head, and I'm like, ooh, who is that? What is that? This sounds like the beginning of a story. Mm-hmm. And then I'm off to the races, you know? Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You have talked before, when we have had conversations, you've talked before about real magic versus magical realism. And I know real magic weaves in and out of your life. I think you're touching on real magic as you read that. But is there anything more you'd like to say about real magic and sort of this dance between everyday objective reality? Here we are sitting in Plymouth Congregational Church, and yet sometimes there is something else moving through that space and navigating those two worlds.
That's a wonderful, you're really good at this. You have really wonderful questions. So thank you. And please jump in too when you have something to add, because I know you're working on this terrain as well. And she's just a phenomenal writer, and I've had the honor of being able to read a memoir that she wrote about her spiritual journey and being in Guatemala and learning all that she learned. So yeah, this book right here kind of speaks to that question, in that I made a choice as a writer so that people who don't believe that a so-called inanimate object can ever be alive in any way, can ever have spirit, that they be able to believe that these three doll characters in the book are pure. They don't have any real agency. They aren't really speaking to the girls they live with. Rather, it's all coming from the girl's imagination. So I was careful so only the little girls ever hear them speak, only the little girls ever see them moving. The other people around don't. Now for me, I believe, oh my gosh, these dolls really are alive and they have agency, and I give them the last word in the book. And that comes from my Dakota upbringing. And it's even in some indigenous languages where the words for everything, it makes everything animate. So there is no such thing as an inanimate object. Everything has animacy. Everything has spirit. I'm not saying all indigenous languages are that way, but several of them are. And so my mother raised me telling me that everything has spirit, everything is alive. And she was phenomenal at telling these stories. She saw story everywhere. She saw life everywhere. And so, you know, sitting in a gorgeous place like this, she'd be able to tell a story, you know, about these arches and how the arches were created in a way so that the ones that get along with each other are near each other, and then the ones on either end were placed far apart because they don't like each other. They were made by different people, and the two people that created the different arches didn't like each other, and so it's like that was infused, and you get the idea, right? And so, so I'm coming from that place that when I write about these dolls and how they try so hard to protect their girls and intervene, and one of them actually sort of, well, they all kind of do at different moments in a way that the Western mind and way of looking at things would say is magic, and so this is an instance of magical realism. But for me, no, it's real magic. It is possible, and yeah. So that's just my reality. But again, when I say that, I'm not saying I'm right in that. I'm just saying that's the belief system that informs my way of looking at everything.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you've had some interesting experiences too.
I have, and I think very much so. My time in Guatemala, where Mayan, you know, they have the ka'ush, which I can't say it right, but that's the spirit that imbues everything. Mm-hmm. And certainly in yoga, we have prana, that life force that is moving through everything. And so it is very much not something I was necessarily raised with, but it's something I have come into, mm-hmm. and I certainly feel moving in my own life. Mm-hmm. And there is something about imagination as living spirit. Mm-hmm. And yeah, do you have any thoughts about imagination as living spirit and what we animate through writing? I mean, you've talked a little bit about it. Obviously, the dolls have been animated.
I have a little thing here in my notes that will help me be more articulate than I would be on my own. I mean, these are my words and thoughts. It's kind of organized for me. So this is brief. Long ago, I learned that my best writing features characters who seem to exist outside my plots and designs, who won't conform to the roles I've dreamed up for them. They love someone other than the person I'd intended. They are more or less political than I'd hoped. They will or won't give birth to a child I want them to have. They give up their secrets at once or hide them from me for years until I've passed some hidden test. I am not kidding. I can write them however I like, of course. Move their arms and legs, put my own words into their mouths and leave them there. I can assume the role of puppet master and bid them dance to my music. But when I read back these over-controlled narratives, I'm embarrassed by the result. There is no truth in these drafts. They show evidence of ego, thinking that as the writer, I am God of my work, God of my creativity. They show evidence of impatience when I'm unwilling to put in hours of research and musing. hours of producing experimental drafts that might not work out. But when I accept that my fictional characters are beings sparked to life in ways I don't understand, in ways I must honor, I'm always rewarded for the choice. My characters not only tell stories I know are true on the deepest level, they breathe more life into me, as if we are co-creators in the mysterious process. Yeah, I don't know if that makes any sense.
It does.
But
well, and you brought up some characters holding out on you. I know in Sacred Wilderness, there was a character, maybe you'd share that story, who was not forthcoming.
yes, oh my gosh. I don't know if any of you have heard of the writer Alan Gurganis. You might be more familiar with his novel, The Oldest Living Confederate Widow Tells All, which was a huge bestseller. But I really favor, and I like that book, but I really love his short story collection just called White People, because he comes from white people. And it's a story about, it's fiction, but based on his family stories. And when he came to the Iowa Writers Workshop on a visit years ago, he gave a reading and just blew me away with his spirit that was coming through. And I didn't really have the language yet to call it that. I was still afraid of the woo-woo. And even though I was being broken open, but that's what was coming through. And he told us to have love and compassion for all of our characters and to never judge them. He's like, even the bad ones, the ones doing bad things, they need even more love and compassion. So they're going to do what they're going to do, and we don't have to approve of that, but don't judge them. I was judging one of my characters. I knew that there's a character in contemporary times who is part Mohawk, but she has really lost touch. She's like the second generation removed from her people. She knows nothing about her heritage. And so she's a very wealthy woman because of her husband and his success. And they live in St. Paul and in one of those mansions, this huge mansion. And bless her heart, she's just a hot mess and doesn't know who she is. And I knew it was her grandmother who was the character who had left their people. And that's why there's this granddaughter who is such a lost being. And I was kind of judging that grandmother. And I was trying to figure out when did she leave? Why did she leave? And I kept thinking it was because she was ashamed of being Mohawk. And so it took years of doing all my little exercises that I do to writing prompts, and to try to pull her story forward. And finally, when I stopped judging her, and I just sat down and just said, please, I want to understand. Please help me to understand who you are. She gave up the story just like that. And I know that can sound strange to people for whom this kind of way of talking about process. I know a lot of wonderful writers who produce beautiful books where they are very conscious. They really are being sort of puppet masters, right? They want to explore a certain idea, and then they're like, okay, I need a guy who's about this age, and they're coming at it in a different way, and it's totally successful and totally filled with spirit. It's just they're coming at it differently. But with me, I have this other process that I just have to work the best I can, and sometimes be patient when it takes a long time. Because if I had just invented the story about why she left, it wouldn't have been true, and I would have known it wasn't true, because it just lies dead on the page. It's like, when you have a gorgeous piece of fruit, and then you turn it, and there's this spot that's just, it's like the fruit is infected, That's how it feels when something isn't true on the page, even though it's all fiction, but where it really feels like that's not the truth of the fiction. It's just got that rotting section there that I can't allow to sit there. So, yeah. Have you ever had that where you just knew this isn't the answer? Yeah. This is what I put down on paper, but this isn't it.
Yes, where it takes far longer. Sometimes it would be like, oh, I wish I could just
Yeah.
push things into place and shove things around and make it happen. But sometimes it's like, no, this isn't working and I don't understand yet. So very much so.
I mean, because we would love to be the directors, right? But some of us feel like, oh no, they're directing us.
Yeah.
But sometimes they're not being clear on the direction. You're like, please, please.
Yes. And how do you prime yourself to connect with your intuition?
I have a little piece here. Oh dear. This really does help me though. Okay. How to engage intuition. 15, 16. My God, I was really actually organized this time. I'm proud of myself.
We didn't prepare this, so this is just kind of, we didn't talk ahead of time.
Yeah. Okay, here it is. After years of practice, I've learned that when searching for answers to questions of plot and character in fiction, one of the best strategies is to head outside for a long walk. And if that's not possible, because I know for health matters, not everyone can do that, try to find a place outdoors where I can install myself for a time. I'm not sure if it's the exercise that stimulates my imagination or the inspiration of open sky as a reminder of infinite possibility. The sky dominates here in Minnesota, even in the cities. Beneath this sky, there is nothing separating me from the wisdom of those who have come before me and all the stories sky has witnessed. Voices, memories, joys, sorrows, love, betrayal swirl around me on these walks. I see the switch of an albino squirrel's white tail, the red crest of a woodpecker, the loopy grin of a passing dog. Trees gossip with one another in raspy whispers, and music blasts from passing cars. Moment by moment, my own story merges with this astonishment of life, and an opening to the abundant sky and surrounding community. I find answers to questions, hear fragments of dialogue, receive further clues and hints about what new trails to follow. I'm a detective on the hunt for the truth of my fiction, the real story. And another writer, Tommy Orange, another Native American writer, who is Cheyenne, he says a very similar thing, that he's a runner, like he's a serious long distance runner. And on his runs, that's where he solves the problems in his writing. He has to be out there. I don't know what it is, but yeah, the outdoors is so often where I find the answers. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I was struck by how in all of your fiction, this one hews most closely to your personal story, your personal history. And I'm curious, do you have any sense of the deeper truths that fiction allowed you to touch into that you might not have with nonfiction?
Another great question, thank you. And that's something that I don't think I would have been able to answer right away. I often, part of being an intuitive writer, at least for me, is that I don't always know what I've written exactly, not in a lit crit way, right? I need some time and distance. It really helps when people start writing reviews or papers about what I've written. And I'm like, tell me what I've done. Oh, okay, thank you. So it can take a while. But one of the things that hit me, even as I was writing, so maybe I would have been able to speak to this back then, is how I felt the act of writing this book. Okay, this is gonna sound like a lot of hubris. It felt, just saying it felt, as if I was healing rifts within the family, rifts between generations of people now gone. They were showing up in slightly changed forms, because I was making change. It is fiction, but there's also a lot that was that was lived in my family that was inspiring certain characters, certain scenes and experiences. And I felt as if just in writing with all of this love and forgiveness, that it was spreading beyond me. It was spreading to my loved ones that came before me, that there was healing going on far beyond what I had ever imagined. I was so locked in my own healing journey that I didn't even think about the possibility that just perhaps this is helping some of these spirits of aunts and uncles and grandparents and great-grandparents, where people passed on with bad blood, where people still weren't speaking to each other. But now they're coming together and they're being held with so much love and compassion by a relative who is trying to be honest about what they went through, honest about their strengths and their mistakes, but honest too about what is possible and how much healing is possible. And so yeah, that made this book more special to me than anything I've written before, because it just felt like it was about so much more than a book, than a novel, or writing fiction. It was actually just getting in there and really trying to do what you call intergenerational healing. Yeah.
So in the novel, there is a character, the injured woman. I'm going to ask you a question about her, but can you give everybody a little context first?
So there's a character in the novel. She is in the section, I read from Cora's voice earlier from her journal. So this is within her section. It's while she's at the Carlisle Indian Industrial School, and she is dying of pneumonia. Many of the children arrived there and they weren't used to the weather, the diet, the stress, all that they were being put through. And some of them didn't survive, and there's a graveyard there for Carlisle students who died. And so it looks like she is going to be joining them. But as she is there in her bed, fighting for each breath, all of a sudden a woman sort of floats in above her like a fish, just swimming through water, and reveals herself. And she is the Koda, and she's horribly injured. When Cora can see her body, it's just horrific. She's been stabbed with what looks like bayonets. She's been shot through. And it all looks very fresh. It all looks like it just happened, like she just came from the massacre ground when my people were massacred at Whitestone Hill in the 1860s. And I really didn't want this character in the book. I was like, this is too far, this is too much, at least for a lot of Native readers. This is just gonna be too much, certainly for Lakota readers. It's like, oh my gosh, I don't want to put people through this. But she kept showing up. And the way I work, I have to honor what shows up because I do trust it. So I had to figure out, why is she so determined to be here, and why is she keeping, because the other thing she's doing that is so horrible is she's keeping the wounds open. She will not allow them to heal. And I mean, it's so intense, and I keep it short. It's a short scene. I don't linger there. But what she explained, why she's in the story in that moment, she is there to rescue her descendant. She keeps her from dying. As soon as she is there, above Cora, Cora can breathe again. She realizes, she says, she came to stand between me and a foreign grave, foreign being Pennsylvania ground in this school. And the ancestor can't speak because she doesn't have a tongue any longer, but she's able to communicate and make clear that she's not a perverse person who delights in pain. The reason she's doing it is because she doesn't want the fake healing of a scar. How our flesh, sure, it can close over, but these certain wounds will never really heal. It's papering over them. And to have true healing, you have to have the truth of your experience exposed. You have to be able to speak your truth and have people hear it. Whether you're speaking to injuries that came within a family, and you need the family to hear and be real about it and process it at some point, or if it's a community, or if it's a tribe, or if it's a nation. And then seeing the kind of conversations that were happening publicly about those who don't want certain people in this country to talk about what happened to ancestors that is still with us in our bodies, in our DNA. I'm like, that's why the injured woman has shown up. And I cannot push her out. She needs to be here, even if it's rough. Because, you know, healing is rough, and we're not healing yet for a lot of us, you know. And so, sorry about that little rant.
Well, I was going to quote one of the things that she communicates to Cora, which is, there is no true healing without remembering, which you just spoke about. There is no true healing without remembering.
Because we hear all the time people say, oh, just get over it. Oh, just move on. The problem is we really don't move on. Not really, not in a healthy way.
Yeah. And so was there, and maybe you've already touched on this, but was there a point where you knew specifically, yes, this is a book about intergenerational healing? Like a point at which you were in the manuscript itself where you're like, ding, the light bulb went off, I know what I'm writing about.
I don't recall exactly what point. It came on slowly because I was so in it. Sometimes, you know, when you are, it's like you're at the bottom of the ocean, and you know, I'm just in that ocean of the fiction, and I'm in the characters' minds, and so I'm not able to really see the big picture. So, but by the time I get to part 4, which is the chapter that's all about healing, interestingly, they always tell you not to read your Goodreads reviews, but I have been reading the Goodreads reviews online for this book. They are just overwhelmingly loving and generous and beautiful and kind, and I've been so grateful. And of course, it's not going to be for all tastes, and that's totally cool. So I don't get bent out of shape. But it's interesting that when there is resistance to this book, it's always about part 4, which is the healing section, right? People are loving the trauma. I mean, they're not loving it, but they're like, hey, oh, these girls going through all this trauma, and we love them. And then, oh my God, what's all this about? But yeah, healing is really hard. So it wasn't until I got to that section, which I wrote last, that I'm like, oh, that's what's going on here. You know, that's the big picture. Yeah. But it took me a while to understand that. And then and that helped me understand why, too. I thought when I first had the idea come about this book, it was actually a friend who gave me the idea to turn a short story I'd written into a novel. And I started thinking about it in those terms. I thought, oh, hey, finally I will write a novel in chronological order. I will have it, I won't be whipping people around in time or going backwards, or, you know, it'll be written where, you know, you start with the earliest characters who were born longer ago. And I had just started to try to conceive of it that way and work with it that way when I thought, oh, no. You can't do it, you gotta do it the other way around. Start with the youngest generation, and you see how they've inherited this trauma. You see it in action, how it's playing out. You don't understand where it's coming from exactly, but you see it playing out. And you see one of the parents that you might be a little judgy about, because can be a lot. She can be kind of abusive sometimes. But then in the next section, you see that parent as a child, and you see what she's contending with. And so you might develop more compassion and judge her less, but she's got a father who's an alcoholic, and oh my God, he can be a lot. But then in the next section, he's not the narrator, but you see him as a boy and what he's going through, oh my gosh. And so in that way, I was hoping the reader would no longer in any way, if they had been, villainize any of these parents who are victims of the trauma they've gone through, rather begin to see that if there's a villain in the book, it's colonization itself. But again, when I'm so in the weeds, figuring out the big picture takes me a while. So, yeah.
Well, so coming to part 4 about healing, there is a great character named Prince who provides. And would you talk about Prince and how humor helps with healing?
Yes. So, yes, this prince is a Moluccan cockatoo, and who really, really likes music, and he loves to dance. And he is named after the prince, our prince. And he particularly loves Prince's music. Although he likes all music, like he even gets into like the Irish river dance kind of thing, and he's stomping his little feet. And he is a character, you know, with a capital C. And he was not a character I came up with in any way. Consciously, I wasn't like, oh, let me have a bird character, or let me have a character for some, you know, a little bit of humor, a little bit of relief. He just barged into a scene I was writing. And he just showed up like, I belong here. And he flew in. He actually flew into the scene and grabs one of the dolls by the hair and is carrying her away. And I'm like, wow, what's this all about? And yeah, he felt like he absolutely belonged there. I wasn't even going to try to push Prince out of the chapter. It's like, okay, he belongs here. But it was, again, only later, after I'd finished writing the book, that I realized he showed up, even though he's fictional, he was very real to me. I mean, he just cracked me up. I loved him. And I thought he showed up as my fictional, emotional support bird. And I'm not kidding. You know, I'd be getting, because it is fiction, I made choices early on that helped me to make the leap into the imagination, so that it wasn't just me writing some kind of autobiography. However, again, there were details, dynamics, certainly from my lived experience and my family's lived experiences. And so I'd be in an intense moment that was taking me back, or was triggering me. And then that's when Prince shows up, you know, to kind of make me laugh and to be able to keep going. So I wasn't going to stop. I wasn't going to give up. I was going to keep writing. So yeah, he was so important to the process of writing the healing chapter.
Yeah. He's a great character. Just, yeah, what a wonderful, he provides a lot of comic relief, I'll say that.
He even gets his person in trouble because he hears the mailman one day who's dropping the mail in a slot. It's one of those things where it's not like in a little box, it's coming right in the door. And he's apparently been watching, or when his person is watching old Columbo reruns, he watches along too. And so he's picked up a few words and he screams, "Murder!" And so, yeah, the police get called. And,
oh. So, a little setup here. You have a beautiful passage on creativity, which I'm going to read, and then I'm going to ask you a question from that. So you say creativity that comes from our most courageous, authentic heart opens us up to the flow. An unseen river of images, insights, and visions where we connect across time with all that has ever lived. And when we come to your part about healing, that chapter 4, there's so many lines. I really had a hard time. You know, I put a bunch of them down, and I'm not going to go through all of them, but that there's a point where you start giving the doll Ethel's story, and it reads like you are just receiving a download, where there's something about the text that feels like something is being just dropped into you and through you as you come to that section 4. And that was my experience as a reader. Was that your experience as a writer? Is there anything more you'd like to say about that?
about
Well, so
the
like,
chapter, which section again?
the whole last chapter, I'd say from where Ethel gets to tell, or
Okay.
Ethel gets to tell her story
Okay.
on I mean, there are just like line after line after line of all these pieces coming together. You talk about a puzzle, and all of a sudden, all of these pieces of healing come together. It just feels like a channeling that you are doing that is different than other parts of the book.
I mean, I did write it in pieces, not all at once, and I often write the endings first, not yet understanding what it all means, but some part of me clearly knows, or something guiding me clearly knows, and will help me find my way there. And so I wrote the ending first, the ending of part 4, all the dolls, giving them the last word. I wrote that part of part 4 first. Not knowing yet even what all their individual stories were that they'd be allowed to tell for themselves. But then when I'm writing about process a little there, that's coming from the artist me, you know, that's coming from my artist self, really. But in a way, I mean, the way I look at it, almost everything that I'm writing is coming from beyond me. And I don't mean, I don't mean to take away all credit for my work, because I type now. I used to have to do it all longhand, writing longhand before, but this novel I typed the whole thing. Part of it's probably arthritis. It's just, oh, it hurts to do all that writing. But I'm pausing all the time to look up words, and at the online thesaurus, you know, oh, I keep using this same word, and let me kind of try to find something and mix it up, and I'm constantly reading aloud. I do a lot of reading aloud as I'm writing. So I am working. I don't mean it's all just, you know, coming along like that. But I do think the ultimate source is beyond me. So you could say everything is channeled in that way, even though I'm doing work.
I was thinking about my process where I feel like sometimes it is like a download and it just comes out and through, and I'm just taking dictation. And then there are times where I think it's more like that creative river, where I'm like, okay, I'm making a conscious choice to wade into these waters. I don't know what's going to happen, but here I am waiting, just kind of wading in and waiting to see. And so sometimes I have like this horizontal feeling of like the information just channeling through, and sometimes it feels more like, okay, I'm just wading into imagination, into this intuitive space, and it feels more vertical. I don't know if that makes sense.
No, that's actually a beautiful way of describing it, and I have a very similar experience, but for me, what comes more easily will be a scene where something's happening, or someone's remembering something that happened. The more kind of languagey bits, you know, like writing about the flow, that's what I have to work at. That's more the stuff where I'm reading it aloud, and the rhythm, because the rhythm's important. So I'm looking for the right word. So that's when I actually slow down. So I do have that more ease, but it's more often with a scene than with when I'm talking about ideas or writing about ideas. Yeah.
So the book grew out of the story naming ceremony. Names the character Sissy. By the end, she goes by Jessie. Names are a huge part of it. She finally learns the name of the injured woman. And so a question for you would be, how do names play a role in healing ourselves, healing our world?
That's a phenomenal question, and especially with this book, so thank you. So in real life, my mother's name was Susan Power. I mean, once she was married, that was her married name. And I was named at birth Susan Power. And so in the Indian community of Chicago, she was Big Susie and I was Little Susie. And because she was my hero, my guru, my everything, and I adored her and I wanted to be her in so many ways, I loved that. And then as I became a woman, it wasn't so healthy because I realized that for both of us, I didn't exist. I was another arm. She had another arm. And she could never comprehend that I had different feelings or different attitudes than hers because I was another arm that was going rogue sometimes, and that's not good. And so at some point, I actually dated a guy who said, okay, well, so Susan doesn't feel like your name, so what's your name? And I just suddenly heard myself say Mona. And so for years, he privately called me Mona. And then at some point I was like, well, why don't I just take this out beyond this personal connection? And so I changed it on email and I changed it on Facebook, not legally because it's just such a problem to jump through all those hoops. And so my earlier books used Susan, and now I use Mona Susan, and that changed everything. It allowed me to step into this new version of myself who spent years working on taking apart, dismantling, and changing that inner script from hell. And actually, even though I'm not Buddhist, it was Buddhist writers who helped me do that. Sharon Salzberg, Thich Nhat Hanh, about retraining the mind. Year in and year out, I would gently correct that horrible script that wanted to throw acid on, if I was having a hard time and stumbling, it would just pour acid on the problem. If I was actually accomplishing something, it was like, you know, you don't really deserve that. You just lucked into that, so we're going to have to self-sabotage that real quick, right? You just gently correct it and say no. And at some point, like the end of the book, this character finally, who has been working on healing, I had done the work to get myself to this point where there was one of these supermoons in the fall of 2019, and even though intellectually I knew that the shame I carried wasn't my own and it wasn't reasonable to carry it, it wasn't doing me or anyone any favors, it wasn't helping me to be a force for good in the world, because if we're constantly so injured, we're not stable. Ego is running the show, right? And all of a sudden, you know, Brene Brown and her, bless her books, you know, all of it clicked into place, and all of me believed, not just my head. And I just shed all of that shame and just walked out of that old skin. And I am Mona now. So for me, names are everything. And there's a reason why a lot of Indigenous people, we have multiple names. There's your childhood name, there's the name that's for the position in the family. You know, were you born the first son, the second son, the first daughter? Names gifted when you've done something that requires honoring, because we're changing, you know, so we require lots of names. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Oh, there we go.
There.
Yes, let's widen the conversation. So yeah, is there anyone who would like to ask a question of either of our writers or share an observation? And Emily, if there's anyone online as well, you're welcome to ask questions. Yeah, from Carolyn.
I'm so happy to be a witness to this beautiful conversation. My question is, when you talked about sort of that learning process in your writing of learning how to be patient, learning how to step back from directing everything and you know, fitting things a certain way, it makes me curious about how and if that learning applied to other areas of your life as well?
Oh, that's a really good question. Well, I'm still very much a work in progress, and I think I'm clearer about my strategies that I can lean into to help me to be patient, to help me to figure things out when I'm working through a puzzle in my writing. And actually now, I have to say, I am much more patient with myself, with the journey, with where I am at any given moment, and taking that trust that I had years ago in my writing process. And now it is a part of my living process. I mean, I have my moments. We all have our moments where we're like, you know, but they happen less often, and I get over them more quickly, and they're private. You know, I'm not having to get triggered and run around and run amok. So that's a really good thing. So yeah, so it's finally starting to happen. Yeah.
First of all, I wanted to thank you. I really needed this reading and conversation tonight. One thing that I'm wondering about, I know that so many writers read a lot, and I'm curious how much reading helps in this kind of spiritual connection part that you're talking about.
Oh, thank you. And this is Maureen, who is one of my favorite writers, and some of her writing has inspired me a great deal. And you should speak to this too.
No.
I was somebody who, from a really early age, was always turning to books as my first go-to assistance. And because I treated, like my mother, both my parents, I mean, they met in the world of publishing, so we were book lovers, all of us. And my mother and I had several libraries that we would go to every week, different ones all around the city of Chicago. And so librarians noticed that I handled books very reverently, even when I was really little. So they gave me my first library card when I was 2 years old. So I was so proud of it. And I never, took a crayon to the books or anything, or bent the pages. And so when I was trying to figure things out, and knowing that there was a lot that I had to heal, I knew that as a child, I was turning to books first and foremost. And as I mentioned, the Buddhists helped so much, but also a lot of poets too. And okay, this might sound strange, but Alice Munro short stories, like they're not always overtly spiritual, but there's something about that woman's voice and storytelling ability and love just for people that comes through that just would always lift me up and inspire me in some way, as do some of Ann Patchett's essays. So yeah, writing, and oh my God, and Louise Erdrich, oh my gosh, she's one of my favorite writers. And there's so much that I'm learning spiritually from her novels, that she's been an incredible resource too. Do you have?
I don't have much to add to that. I mean, I will just say that yes, as a writer, I'm also an active reader. I think most writers are. But there's something about writing or reading that even from an early point, I guess that's what I'd like to talk about, is that from an early point, reading was a way of starting to step outside my own ego, get into somebody else's skin, worldview, understand the world in a way that my own limited experience didn't allow. So if nothing else, that process of particularly reading fiction was that stepping stone into moving more into this intuitive realm.
I so love that you said that. This is why we need the humanities. Sorry, I won't say anything more. But I remember being a kid, like in middle school, and stumbling across Jane Austen, and she seemed like she had lived so long ago. Now that I'm my age now, I'm like, oh, that wasn't that long ago. But and I was blown away by how much I connected with her voice because of the way that she would take on hypocrites and poke them, and I really hated hypocrisy too. I mean, that's why I left our particular church in 5th grade. And so hypocrisy was my bugaboo. And here, it blew my mind that I'm this urban Indian Dakota girl living in an entirely different era, and I'm connecting with this British woman from, to me, ancient times who lived in such a different world, and I felt like we'd be friends. And we have something in common. And that was just wonderful. It was magic. It felt like magic, yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I have a question for you. One thing that I love about your work is that devotion to healing. And what you touched on this a little bit in the conversation already about that fourth chapter and people resisting it. But I think what's so special about your writing is that there is so much kind of general tone of so much like, let me flaunt my trauma this way or flaunt my trauma that way. And without a kind of responsibility to hold it in a healing way, or as if just recounting, like there's, as if just recounting how horrible it was all that needed to happen. And I love that you kind of embrace that there's something else. And I was just curious for you to just talk a little bit more about your sense of responsibility, or if that's the word you would have, why you really so strongly hold it in that healing lens.
Oh, thank you. That is such a great question. I absolutely felt a sense of responsibility once I knew that that little story was going to become a novel. The responsibility I felt was first and foremost to family members, because they were going to recognize some, again, there's a lot of fiction in there, but there's also some true dynamics and details. And, but then beyond that to our tribal nation, and then beyond that to Native readers, for whom a lot of this would be familiar trauma turf. So I was making choices along the way thinking of that. I wasn't going to linger in the really hard stuff, the really atrocious things that happened. I wasn't going to give you every description and every detail. It's like, you've got enough. You don't want to envision all of this. And also, I made sure, my process is very organic, but I'll just say I encouraged the moments of humor here and there. Thought, yeah, we need, because my goodness, in my family we're constantly laughing. It's not always just all that's difficult and all that's sad and everyone arguing. There is so much humor. And even the humor, when I give readings, I often will read these two brief, if there's a villain in the book, a human villain, for me it's Sister Frances. and her Sister Frances, she is a nun at one of the Indian boarding schools that my mother's generation, the character from my mother's generation attends. And I grew up hearing a lot about these nuns at my mother's Catholic boarding school that she went to. And but even with Sister Frances, I have these two sort of lighter scenes that are a little bit humorous, and those are the ones that I choose to read when I'm giving readings, trying to give people a break and not just hit them with too much. And one of the dolls brings in a lot of humor. So I have these three doll characters. One is based on my own doll I had growing up. She was a tiny Thumbelina doll, and she's black, and I just adored her and carried her with me everywhere. And then there is a Shirley Temple doll in the 30s, and her name is Mae, after Mae West. And then there is a traditional Dakota-style doll. She's made of deer skin, and originally she was decorated with porcupine quills, but then as she was passed down to so many generations, they remade her with beadwork. And each of those dolls had such different personalities. And the Dakota doll was the most traumatized, so it took a while to pull her story out of her. Ethel, the tiny Thumbelina doll from the 60s, she was willing to talk, but she wouldn't take over. But the Shirley Temple doll, she would not stop talking. I was like, sweetie, you can't take over the whole book. So part of my process of working with all of this and thinking of the reader was definitely to try to give them lighter moments and to just make clear all the love that is there between these families, even when they're family members, even when they're going through a lot. And knowing it was ultimately going to be a story about healing, which I recognize now when I look back on most of my writing involves that. It's there. That's a really important theme that shows up over and over and over. Even in the horror novels that I've started writing, it's healing. Healing is really an important part of those stories too. So.
Yes, thank you. One last question I think we have time for.
Forgive me if this is obvious and I just don't know it. Do you have anything written where we could go to learn the process? Like I wrote down in your comments about going outside and what that can do. Are there places to go to reread the things you've talked about so that we could learn that or learn some of your process also?
Oh, thank you for asking. Sure. And actually, there are two. I have these different quotes from two different sources. One, Sun Yung-shin invited me to write an essay for the Minnesota Artists Project that is, I guess, I don't know, hosted or by the Walker Arts Center. And so in 2020, they published my essay that's still online. And the essay is called Spirit Talk. So Spirit Talk. And if you look under like MN artists, you should be able to find it. And then I wrote for Sundress, it's one word, publications. They have online, free to anyone, a whole a chapbook, a chapcraft series. And they invite writers to write about craft each year, like maybe 3 of us. So I wrote one. It's like about 14, 15 pages long, and the title, it has a kind of lofty title, real dramatic. So the title that you should be able, if you Google it, to find it, The Structure of Love, Anatomy of a Novel. And it's about process, specifically talking about Sacred Wilderness, which was the last book before this one. So The Structure of Love, Anatomy of a Novel. That's online via Sundress, like the sun wearing a dress, publications, and then / craft chaps.
And I want to piggyback on that. If you're interested in creative process as spiritual practice, that is essentially what Eye of the Heart is about. And so if you look at our programs, we have a number of writing programs that are really focused on using craft, learning the craft, but using it as a means of personal transformation and connection. And I'm going to ask Elizabeth, in response to your question, to describe the embodied writing.
Oh, so I have been facilitating a group called Embodied Writing, and it's really about generating new writing material. Sometimes people are coming and they're working on longer projects, they're working on novels, they're working on, ongoing work. And some people are like, I just want to come and see what I can produce today, what I can generate. And so we usually start out with a centering, we kind of check in with each other, say what we might be working on. I offer prompts, both for fiction and nonfiction, and then we move for about 20 minutes. Most of it is a practice emerging from something I'm trained in called Let Your Yoga Dance. It's very freewheeling. I know the word dance is terrifying to many people. They think I can't dance, but it really is much more about moving into your body in the way you did when you were a kid, when you had no sense of critics saying, you can't do that. Like half the time we're like, okay, we're sweeping our space, or we're pretending that we're starting to prime our imagination by moving our body in a very imaginative way. So by the time we sit down and write with each other for about 45 minutes, we're sort of, the resistance is out of the way. We've cleared it out. And magic seems to happen every time I facilitate the practice. Like people come away with, I don't know, one person who keeps coming back says, I get so much writing done when I come to this. She's working on a novel. Other people have like, oh, it was a synchronicity because I was working on this and the way we moved helped me feel what it was like to be in my character. So it is a way that we actually use our body to get into that intuitive place, to tap into spirit. Yeah.
Great. And along those lines, I am prolific in writing prompts, and I have a writing prompt or a reflective prompt to offer you by way of bringing our time to a close. Inspired by Mona's book, if your intuition took a form outside of yourself, a doll, an animal, an object, what form would it take? And what story might emerge as you interacted with that form? So I invite you to take that with you and see where it takes you. Listen to that object and allow it to lead your writing. Thank you both.
I am
Yeah, go ahead.
wondering if we could let the dolls have the last
Oh,
word.
please. Okay.
Yeah,
Okay, how much?
just their last word.
Okay,
That would be wonderful.
absolutely. Okay. Like that and that, or
Sure.
just that? Okay.
Yeah.
I take direction well. It helps me to have direction. We've learned that healing the present doesn't only clear waters flowing into the future, recovery also flows backward and alleviates the suffering of ancestors, so they can set down their tears and dark memories, their guilt and shame, their vengeance. And because time is our relative, a flexible being that moves through every thought and memory, branching into a million rivers of possibility, healing even one of its streams, will eventually heal the world. Wrecked children inherit the power of the destroyed, a formidable energy. They create the ferocious allies they need either to survive or let go and embrace destruction. Mended children carry stronger medicine. Their magic unites the flow of time with love, our oldest waters, and so they bring us home. Thank you.